And yeah, we are about to start. We already counting on 16 attendees, which is very good for the first moment of our live stream today. And I'm super excited to be here soon. I'll let Matteo and Liran present themselves, but the topic of Node.js is very close to my heart for people that already know me. For people that did not know me yet, my name is Gabriel. I'm leading the developer relation in Permit.io. We are doing authorization, but we are not here today to talk about Permit.io. We are here today to talk about Node.js security. And we are also celebrating the new book of Liran about Node.js security. So congrats, Liran, on that. I think that's one of the most important topics developers should talk about. So everyone just go to, I think it's a, sorry?
That was a surprise. I wasn't expecting that. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good one. And I really love the website format of it. So soon I'll let you introduce yourself, and I'll be really happy to get some words about it. We'll start with introduction in 1 minute. I see that people still joining, and don't want anyone to lose anything. So I'll thank again Duran and Matteo for being here. And yeah. Cool. So I think we are good to start. We are counting 25 attendees, and I hope it will grow later. So hey everyone, and welcome to our Node.js security live stream hosted by Permit.io. We are hosting a monthly webinar on topics that related to software development and some form of security. And today I have with me two of the biggest name in the Node.js ecosystem, Matteo and Liran. Both of them are very known. I think if you're being around Node.js for the last couple of years, you probably heard the name of them both. And I'll be really happy for them to introduce themselves. Let's start with Matteo.
Hi, folks. Matteo Collina, Platformatic co-founder and CTO, member of the Node.js Technical Steering Committee, author of many modules. I have 22 billion downloads on NPM last year, which is a lot. Okay, a lot. Please, I have a GitHub sponsor, so you are using my module, so please contribute back. Thank you. And then what else? I've been involved in security at my as a result of my open source activity. Either you are, if you are successful as a maintainer, you will have to deal with security. And I've been a huge champion on the fact that secure open source is funded open source. So in order to fix the issues about supply chain and security of open source, you need to have a funding line, and you need to be able to, developers need to be able to spend the time that they need on those things. So it's, yeah, that's me.
Yeah, thanks, Matteo. And Liran, a couple of words about yourself.
Sure, yeah. So I guess people know me as a developer advocate for Snyk most of the times. I do a bunch of speaking activities, research, all those kind of things around Node security. Wrote a couple of books on secure coding with Node. Yeah, I guess just having a lot of fun doing very cool stuff around Node. That's it.
Yeah, great. And you're both like no name in the ecosystem, in the community. I'll start with asking you, Liran, if I'm like asking you, I want to also influence the ecosystem, be known in the community. What do you recommend me to do? What is the career path to develop like influential position on ecosystem or community?
I don't know. I don't think people necessarily who, I don't know, I don't think myself or Matteo were like thinking that's my goal to be an influencer. So it's hard to look at it from that lens. But like in retrospect, I think what kind of made a lot of the difference is kind of being a bit multi-dimensional about it. So interacting with, whatever you are passionate about. Like I think for Matteo, that's been for a long time performance, maybe still is. For me, it was security. For different people, it's different things. Whatever it is, I think it's kind of like just helps kind of like deep diving into different areas. So, find the communities, the working groups, the foundations, the projects, the meetups, the conferences, whatever it is. Just kind of like be very thoughtful about how to attract it. And I think doing that kind of like lends a lot of experience when you actually do it.
So,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Matteo. Yeah, I
So,
just wanted to ask you if you have anything to add
oh,
on
okay.
that.
So for me, okay. So, no, nothing. Um, there was no path. Like you can't. There are certain things that you can become by essentially deciding this is my career path, and I think open source is one of them. Okay, so I think it's possible to, but you need to be. It's not something. It's something quite a lot beyond your control. So you can get. I And in order to go there, if you say, oh, when I grow up, I want to be a professional open source maintainer. Okay, it essentially means that you're going to say, how do you get there? Nobody can give you an answer. The only answer I can give you is throw a lot of stuff against the wall and see what sticks. Okay, which is essentially the same stuff, that the same answer that I will give you. I will give to people. Oh, you're doing a startup. You're starting a new company, so you're going to throw a lot of stuff against the wall and see what sticks. Okay, it's literally
Yeah.
there is there is a thing of randomness. Okay, there is a bit of skill because it depends on how you're throwing, if it will stick into the wall. Okay, but there is also a little bit of randomness into, will it stick, or are you hitting the right spot of the wall for it to stick. Okay, so it's very hard to predict this kind of stuff. However, that being said, um, generically, either if you want to do stuff in open source, either you're starting with your own project and that project become massively successful. This is the path that a few people had. Okay, or you get or you join an established project and you become one of the maintainer of that project by essentially doing the most boring things that you can ever imagine. Okay.
Yeah.
And by boring, I don't mean stuff that's, the boredom or whatever. I mean the stuff that are needed for the project to function, but are not necessarily fancy. Okay. Like, let
Yeah.
me make an example. Handling security reports is the absolutely opposite of fancy. Okay. You do it because you have to do it. Okay. And
Yeah.
Some people like it though.
Some like it.
I
Matteo,
I I I have opinions. Okay, I can read quote by quote the message that I sent recently on Hacker One, on the Node Hacker One report. I was absolutely over my head.
Really.
Earlier this week is Sunday, I think. On Sunday, I sent something very nasty to a reporter. But the generic bits is like certain stuff are necessary, and then if you do necessary work, then at some point you will likely grow naturally into the leadership of that project because you're doing necessary work, so you have a seat at the table, and suddenly you get into being part of the Node.js TSC or the Kubernetes whatever, and you can climb up from a very obscure working group up to leadership. Uh, this is how you grow as a career in open source. Now you can also do ancillary technologies and ancillary products, because by being there, you have more knowledge about the internals, and you can tackle our security, performance, or develop better experience because you have more knowledge that other people have. So all of those things are possible in the realm of the open source maintainer. So everything is possible. It's just you need a project to have a lot of users to exist. So either you join that project or you create one. The chances are it's actually easier to join something, and then the typical person that create things is not the person that's going to maintain it long term. It requires two completely different mentality. So as somebody that has created things and maintains things, it requires a certain level of context switching for
What
things.
did you do first? You first like create Fastify, or first by contributed to the Node.js? You being a maintainer before a creator, or you start as a creator and then?
I have been pushing things out in the open source before, way before Node happened, way before I joined the Node.js, way before I started becoming a collaborator. I actually became a collaborator because I was so damn pissed, and I needed bugs to be fixed. And so I started contributing to Node because I needed the bugs to be fixed. I didn't go to Node for any other reason. I needed the bug fixed. So I fixed my bugs. And then
that's a great strategy.
Suddenly I started, there were also other people's bug, and they were bugging very obscure part of Node. So then I became, in that way, I became master of the streams in Node.js. So one of the few people in the world that actually understand how Node streams work. And I actually fixed them as much as they could be fixed, so that now you can enjoy, I don't know, async iterators. Like if you use async iterators in with Node streams, or a lot in Node.js with all the fanciness, it's because I made it happen. Okay, and it was a lot of refactoring and so on. It was boring work, like it was work that wasn't or laying down the generic path to have fetch in Node.js. Okay.
Yeah.
There is a video of me in 2018 explaining how to get fetch in Node.js, what will need to be done step by step. And it took us 5 years or something to act on that path. Now,
in the Node.js.
So I'm just saying it takes that level of commitment and time. Okay. It's when we are doing with this kind of project. So
yeah, that's great. And we're actually just going to jump now to the security. This is why we are here today. But I want to say to the participants, I see that we have a nice number here in LinkedIn that you can leave a Q&A in either in LinkedIn comments or in the Zoom Q&A, and we'll answer them by the end of the webinar. So talking about Node.js security, so you are both like develop or being involved in Node.js packages and Node.js themselves. As a developer, how much like focus you think you should have on security when you are developing Node.js packages?
It's a good question.
Liran, you're smiling because yours is 100% focus, and I'm fine with that because many people learn from you. But I'm now like a usual developer.
So when authoring new modules?
Yeah. So from the perspective of Node.js package, not a project, then we can talk about projects themselves.
Like as a maintainer, I think, is
as an NPM author, as an author of NPM. Well, at the beginning, you don't give a damn thing about them.
Liran, we not like this.
No,
answer,
but this
right?
is sorry. This is
that's the reality. Yeah.
The reality is that you don't need you should definitely not give a damn thing about it. Okay, because you need to solve your primary. You need to solve the primary function of that module.
Exactly. Yeah.
And focus on the developer experience and so on and so forth. Okay. This being said, okay, the experience of the author matters.
Yeah. I can like,
and there is a
identify
certain
that.
level of things that I wouldn't do, Liran wouldn't do, that a newbie probably would do. Okay, I was chatting with some friend lately, and and basically they were saying to me, "Oh, I implemented a new feature for this project, and it's amazing what you can do with new function."
Yeah.
And
It's amazing, Matteo. You should try it.
look, and yeah. So basically, they were saying, "Well, I developed a nice interpreter for a language, and I use new function for it."
Yeah, that's
Now,
always happened. I think this is
eh,
actually a challenge for package developers. Like you're
eh,
touching the backbones and
yes.
yeah.
So you can. This is where I'm saying, like, certain things you would not do. Okay.
Mhm.
And I would not do, and Liran would not do, and a person that does not have the same enough background would necessarily do or not do those. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, or stay away from certain things. Okay. So, what I would say is from experience, if you're going to do a 1.0 of a module, okay, meaning that you have done several alpha, several 0 point something release, okay, before you go a 1.0, what I would recommend, and I recommend
Mhm.
it for everybody, is write down or have a clear idea what is the security boundary and the threat model of your module, and what
Mhm.
you consider as trusted and what you consider as something that can come from an attacker or what's part of your attack surface. Okay, it can be, it's all trusted. Okay, don't give me any
Yeah.
untrusted input. This is absolutely fine. Okay, but at
Mhm.
least document this up, so the people that use your module might know the answer. Okay, this is probably and also have enable security on GitHub. There is a nice tab. You can go there. You
Mhm.
can enable security reporting on GitHub. This was not there for a long time. It's an amazing
Yeah.
feature of GitHub, so please use that.
And it's
And
now also in GitHub Free, which is a
yeah,
new thing. It was always in GitHub Enterprise.
yeah,
Yeah.
but it's,
And a
come on,
great mhm.
it's a very important feature. Okay, so I can have private
Yeah.
reporting.
Mhm.
Okay, and please enable that. So you have that enabled. People can report bug vulnerability to you in that way. You don't need to use emails or other forms of communication, which might be insecure or might be problematically. It's problematic
Mhm.
secure. Like I've received encrypted GPG emails with vulnerabilities, and if you need to be old enough to have done that at this point. Okay,
Yeah.
like the one of the primary origin for me to have a public GPG key was to be able to receive vulnerabilities, because that's what we were used to do that back in the days. So I've been around
Yeah.
for a bit way before Node to some extent, and that's the so you needed to
Yeah.
have this kind of flow. So yeah, I would say those two things: have a threat model, write down what is the security expectation, and it doesn't need to be perfect, but at least clarify what's are the expectation.
Yeah.
And
I
then
think this is actually, yeah, sorry. I think this is actually a great strategy. So, like, even if you are not focused on developing the security, just make sure it's in somewhere in the back of your brain and document everything, right? So, if I like hear correctly, what you're saying is focus on the functionality, but in the other end, also make sure you're worried about security. So use the automated tools, make sure that you document everything that might be exploitable or vulnerable, and make sure that you are considering with more experienced developer in the platform that you are developing to make sure you do not have like common pitfalls and stuff like that. I think that's a good strategy, especially when you need to focus on the functionality of the module that you want to develop.
yeah,
Yeah, I think that's a very good advice that everyone is needing to get. Um, as you are developing actually packages for others, right? There is two perspectives for security. One is the security in the application itself. So just make sure that the application is secure, the package is secure, the module is secure, but you also have like customers or users. do you also worry about the security for the user? So like sometimes let's talk about Fastify, like it's a HTTP framework, right? Developer that get it as a black box can do a lot of security stuff, right? Because HTTP is a dangerous thing. Are you thinking also on the developers in the security perspective?
Yeah, it's or well, it's not necessarily true. It's I had to become a worldwide expert in cross-site request forgery attacks. Okay, to the point that if you are use multiple apps on the same domain, there is a good chance that you are vulnerable to various level of attacks without even you knowing it. Okay.
Yeah,
And most systems don't even
interesting.
protect you against that. Most SPAs don't. You can just use some fancy cookie tossing technique, and then you are out in the clear. Okay, it's not
Yeah.
hard. Okay, like well, it's super hard, but the problem being it's being on the developing of the framework. You need to learn these kind of things. Okay, I recently had to fix a vulnerability in Fastify that only happened, I think, in Safari or something like that, where there was
Well,
a different default or that enabled a potential CSRF attack. I have no idea. Okay? I had no idea in the
yeah.
time. It was absolutely random stuff. Okay. And on top of that, there are all parts of sort of cookie issues to keep track of, plus JWTs, plus and the question now is not just those, is how do you make those security features into how do you bake them in an API that is nice to use?
Yeah. I think that's also a good question to Liran because you are seeing a lot security vulnerabilities, you are researching security vulnerabilities. What do you think are the most is a misuse of a framework or something that will already exist in a framework and affect anyone that used it? What is most common?
It's a very broad question because it usually depends.
Mm-hmm.
Like if a framework is really a framework, if it's a library and stuff like that. I'll give up like maybe one example to show like the difference. So I would assume most people are like familiar with things like Access as an HTTP,
Yeah,
request client.
client.
And you could ask
Mm-hmm.
yourself, if you just pass user input to Access to fetch a URL. So let's say they want to use that to download an image, a JSON, I don't know, something. And so you pass something to Access. What happens if you don't validate that before? And like my input is something like file colon slash slash slash, and I'm trying to access like local files that are available on the server that Access uses. So I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
is that like a vulnerability? Is it not? Is it intended? It's a bit of I think of like
Not a
like
bug,
an
is a
open.
feature.
Yeah, it's somewhere in between. And I think that's kind of like what Matteo was saying to the beginning, where kind of have to understand what are the boundaries of your application security design. So is this something you're saying, hey, whatever you pass to the library, that's like up to you to figure out and solve. I'm just, acting upon it. Or you're saying, I am putting some, as a library owner, I am validating something. It has to have like a valid scheme. It has to be an HTTP kind of a scheme or something else. And so those are the boundaries that you kind of like have to think of. And you have to have that understanding sometimes in advance, otherwise they indeed become, a security vulnerability that someone reports, and that's kind of like creates a whole tension between did I, intend to do it? Was this by design? Is it a feature? Is it a bug? Like all of that discussion. But I think there's like even if you think about not just frameworks, but projects in general, like you talked about NPM packages before, there's like a broader spectrum of what would be the security
Mm-hmm.
domain that someone
Yeah.
would have to take care of. And, we can like rush to things like, the security of the code stuff, right? Like new function and things like that. But it's also, I mean, there's like a broader one, right? Like the security is like a very large domain, and that could be things like, supply chain security issues, which for like one example that happened, like, I don't know, like the past year or so, I don't remember if it's like 2023 or 2022 maybe, but there was this incident of like expired domains on NPM. There's like a whole academic research paper on this.
Yeah.
You know, maybe I registered to NPM with my own domain, you know, xyz.com, whatever. That expires, then someone can reset my password very easily, have access to all of my NPM packages. And, you know, account takeover just happens. Not that I'm giving anyone ideas, but you could do that. Like some researchers did that, right? And they found out a large amount of packages had that kind of security problem. So it's something that is like completely beyond what you would think of, like, you know, I have like, you wouldn't think of this as like a security problem. It's not even your code or your how you package the whole thing. It's your account. And, you know, that broader spectrum of, you know, supply chain security and code security, and even how you set up your, you know, your GitHub repository. Do you have like protected branches and things like that? Like all of that really amounts the whole attack surface that, you know, a project has. And I think to that end, you know, having that understanding, right? Like, you know, Matteo now knows this from like very, like all of these angles are not new to Matteo because he's like been, you know, fixing them or, you know, doing them throughout his work experience. But if you take up, you know, anyone else who is, you know, also like a very proficient engineer, that doesn't mean that they have, you know, that understanding, that experience around the security domain. And that's where things, you know, become sometimes really hard.
Yeah, I think that what you mentioned now is actually interesting because I remember when I started coding back in 2012, all the responsibility for the, let's say, the server security, it was mine, right? I had like an FTP server. I just uploaded all my file and I had to make sure that my HTA access file is like secure. But today, I think most of the Node.js developer, they're not really worried about this form of security anymore, right? Because these security issues of, let's say, infrastructure and the server and ingress, everything is actually by the DevOps or the platform team. If you are in a small team, right, everyone is doing everything. But if we, from the perspective of the Node.js packages, the security vulnerabilities are more in the code itself, right? So like who access my application, what packages am I using, and everything. And we actually see that in AppSec, particularly the most vulnerable things in OS placed is about access control, right? Things in the code that developers actually forget about it. Do you really think that as a Node.js developer, I had to worry more about my code than my infrastructure, or should I still make sure that I'm looking who is running my server and stuff like that?
Well, I mean, one of the, I think, again, something that I think Matteo will relate to very easily is it's you do care about the infrastructure because if you don't know, for example, what Node.js versions you're running in production, how do you know if it has vulnerabilities or not? Is it up to date or is it not? This is, you know, I think you could argue that a lot of developers don't even know what versions, you know, their product or, you know, their code is running on production. And I think, you know, I don't know, I think that's important. You know, it's hard to say right now, like who's responsible for that? Is like the own developer? Is that the DevOps team? Is that, you know, someone else? There's a project team. There's like so many teams, you know, if you look at a bigger org that could be having that responsibility. But at the end of the day, I think if you're going to get an on-call because you're running some, you know, vulnerable versions of a runtime, that's going to have a very direct impact on, you know, you and the product, you know, that you're building. I think that's just one aspect of it. I do think there's like other aspects of what you would call, I would think, infrastructure, like you were saying, authorization and stuff like that before, that still exists for developers. I mean, not even like no developers, but just like developers in general, like full stack developers that you would imagine today, indie developers. If you deploy an app on Supabase, then you have to, you probably have to do things like row level security with having like those policies over Postgres. And that's like its own whatever. There we go. You see, Matteo is like completely losing it at the moment. Yeah, that exists, right? Like people do that. And I don't know, like if they teach themselves that, if they follow guides, you know, Firebase has a similar,
security model.
I would call it like decoupled concern, right? You have to like write Firebase access rules and store it for storage and stuff like that in its own format, its own DSL. You have to understand it. It's easy to make mistakes. It's not, you know, as clear as you would hope. and developers have to deploy, right? Like they have to do that to get that running. So if you use any of those, that's a problem. I think Matteo wanted to say something about that
Look,
one.
you opened a can of worm essentially on that front. It's
There we go. That's why I'm here.
the
Yeah.
the biggest so when you're designing a secure system, okay, you need to design an onion, okay. You need to think it as an onion, and it's you have separate layers, and you want certain security boundaries, okay. So for example, one of the most important thing is if you have business logic code, okay, you want the system running the business logic code to have a share nothing architecture almost with the system running your authentication logic. And ideally, you want a system, you want it to be another completely different process, ideally like only talking to very public interface with the system doing your authorization system, which is not your authentication system. There is authentication system and the authorization system, and those two guys are very different. Okay, they all start without, but it's a different meaning, okay? Two different words. Okay, and a lot of people collate all of these together. Okay, then you need to identify what is your permission model and design it. So, and there are a solution for your solution out of the box for your authentication, solution out of the box for your authorization box. Okay, and then you need to decide, can this operation happen? Now, your operation is very often not just about the data. Okay, it's about things that you can do on the data. Most applications today are built as a combination of a lot of different things together. Okay, and also you don't really want your authorization logic to be tied to any specific technology. You want it to be as abstract as possible and reason in the form of subject action object type of situation, where you can say, can this subject do something on this other thing, okay, on this resource. Okay, you want to configure it in that way. So it's that's the gist from my point of view. And then you just separated all of this, and then when you're building your server, well, your server is a highly privileged component. Okay, so you're typically runs at a high privilege. So what it means is that an attacker might want to use that to trampoline from being low privilege to high privilege, okay, within your system, and bypass some of the authorization checks. So there are techniques to counterbalance that, okay, starting from the Kerberos of long ago to other stuff. But to JWT, like there are ways to manage this, but the generic part, your server is a high privileged component, so you need to treat it as such, okay. And meaning that when you have inputs, all the inputs must be validated and clearly identified. Okay, you need to be careful about, especially with JavaScript, of prototype poisoning attacks and prototype pollution attacks, which are different. Okay, and if you don't know one or the other,
expand on it, because I think that's the first time I heard on the second.
Oh, the
so
poisoning.
Can you tell a bit of
So the a prototype pollution happen when I have one object, okay, and from one request I can modify the prototype of the global prototypes. Okay, so I can. Okay.
Yeah, because like the data and the language object is like coupled. Because the nature of JavaScript.
And then there is the prototype poisoning. Instead, happens at a local level of a single object, but it can still be very, very dangerous, because it essentially you can have it, you can use it to override some properties of that object, and it can get pretty nasty pretty quickly. So, and most frameworks out there, don't protect against that. So if you're using Express, I can probably send you a very nice and fancy JSON payload and cause a prototype poisoning vulnerability in your code if you happen to take pass that payload into object assign, and then I'm owning your
Really?
server. So, but people use Express every day, right? So sorry, I'm not. I
So
am.
if I yeah, if
I'm
I hear
throwing
that
arrows like
correctly,
that. Okay, it's
yeah.
it's. I'm sorry.
If I hear that correctly, so you're both saying Node.js developers should focus on developing business logic application and make sure that everything that has some security concern is handled by a package or something. So you discussed about like authentication and authorization. Authorization again is a topic close to my heart. This is what we are doing in Permit.io, but authentication also just do not build it yourself. And to Liran point with Supabase, which is very interesting. So Supabase maybe sell you that row level authorization as a security feature, but still it require the developer to maintain this security model, right? So it's a half-baked security for your database or something. And from your Matteo, I'm like, I hear that you're saying keep your server as a highly privileged application, but make sure you have the whole ecosystem that protect you. So you have like a good authentication package and good authorization package, and then you have a good serialization or like validation packages, et cetera, et cetera. So like you're saying the same that happened with infrastructure, that no one think about taking their Node.js files. I hope that no one think about and upload it into an FTP server. The same is also for application components. So everything you worry about security, find a good package or module that help you cover that, right?
Yeah. Well, yes and no. You need to know. Okay,
Yeah.
you need to know. You need to are aware of the problems.
Kind of,
Okay.
yes, but not only that. There's just more that gets
There is
added to
more
it.
to that. There's a lot to know
Oh,
about the topic. Okay, there is it's it's something like it's also the fields is changing constantly, and with new attacks, new things becomes available every week. So you never know. Okay,
yeah.
because there is because we talked a lot about the problem of security in the sense of confidentiality violation. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
but there is
Yeah.
also
It's happened a lot.
security in the form of uh, um, uh, availability, in form of
Mm-hmm.
denying availability or denying integrity of the data. And those other two are actually also two very valid attacks, okay, that you can do against an application. So I can deny your application to be online, and if and those are also another big problem. Okay, it's
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I just want to get back a little to the point you mentioned. Like, so many people think about authentication, authorization, or access control as something that should be controlled in the HTTP endpoint level. But you said we actually need to control that everywhere, right? And also control that, for example, in validation, serialization, right? So from a developer perspective, that thinking about like I want to create right permission or right authorization in my application, what are the layers that you describe to track to make sure that I am fully covered, that my server, as you said, in one end is highly privileged, but on the other end, I can ensure that every layer is covered?
so there isn't a good solution here. It's just
Oh,
a
wow.
plain no. There isn't a good there isn't a good standard solution here. There are a few
Mhm.
companies that are working hard to create something ubiquitous. Okay,
Yeah.
but there is no good, like, there isn't something that is easy to use for devs, or not easy. It's okay easy, okay, but it's
Mhm.
not as instantaneous and snappy that I can just turn it on. And there is all those authentication libraries, and so including permit, they have a lot of configuring it them is not simple.
Yeah.
Okay, in order to
Um,
appreciate permit, yeah, it's not simple. So my okay, just to clarify, what I meaning simple is the developer that I am talking to, okay,
mhm.
is somebody that has that have a little bit of trouble in using CP inside a Docker file. So the type of audience that I'm referring to is a web developer out of a bootcamp that have very little experience. Okay.
I understood.
If
Yeah.
Okay, most of the insecure. I'm not talking about the senior developers now. If the senior developers do not know how to do permission and authentication, well, maybe they're not senior. Okay, and okay, if something needs to be, but if you want to make a lot of software secure, it needs to be secure. It needs to be something that can be explained by after 6 months of a bootcamp, and can be something that can be turned on immediately after 6 months of a bootcamp. And right now, from what I've seen, the generic situation out there in everywhere, we are not at that level of simplicity. Okay, permit is super simple for me,
and the configuration,
okay.
I mean, I can see your point when I'm separating between the config and like make sure that my application model is right and the enforcement itself, right?
Yeah.
And this is why I asked about layers, because there are multiple like design pattern on how do you protect authentication.
I understand the question now. So basically, the two ways to do this. There is the I write a policy, then there is an engine, and I apply the policy everywhere.
Yeah.
Okay. Or there is the do it yourself.
Oh no! Reinventing the wheel. Square shape.
It's yeah, basically, okay, which is which you put, which is very good, okay, because you can basically say, oh, if role equals admin, you open your bracket and you do your thing, okay.
Yeah. That's exactly not the right way to do things. I really want to...
this is the question, okay? Or there is the gist of the other way of doing it in a more more convoluted. The more fancy way of doing this is, okay, I want to, I am a user, I know the user ID, I want to operate on this resource, so I'm writing the logic inside my function to check if I have the permission needed to act on that resource. It's easier. For example, it's part of the organization that I am part of. Okay.
Yeah.
This is a typical case where there is no tool whatsoever that can do this automatically for you. Okay. You need to load up, because no tool will know that organization, that resource belongs to that organization that you are part of. So you need to code that logic yourself, okay? And this is the example of where, and this is something that I think is pretty good model to implement certain things.
Yeah, I want to ask Liran, because I like the way that in your Node security book you layered the journey or the path of our developer to make sure they are worried about security. So my main question is, like, maybe you can bring a checklist. I think it's also a question from the audience, but let's before the checklist, let's try to talk about the developer lifecycle. Right, so let's not talk about the module developer or package developer, because I believe most of the audience are application developer, right? So as an application developer, what do you think the important, I'll call it breakpoint to keep the jargon, but what do you think the important breakpoints that where I should worry or think about security?
So there's no one answer for it, and I think that's part of like the way that why security is hard,
right? Yeah,
it's a journey, but also like there's like no silver bullet, right? Like if we had it, you wouldn't have like multi-trillion dollars market cap of companies doing cybersecurity different aspects, and so I'll touch on several points. Okay, so I think one of them is having that notion of do not trust user input, right? Like that's a notion I always repeat to developers, especially like Matteo said, like early career developers, bootcamp graduates, etc. sometimes even more experienced one. But like even that, like you could think of it, well, okay, I'll never trust user input, but that is a bit more, especially today when applications are more complicated. User input could be a lot of things. It could be a simple, query parameter, but it could also be the file that you have, like a worker node, listening to a queue, processing, event and something, and I don't know, like manipulating images, right? Like in a worker kind of like async job thing. But then like the file name itself, is that something that is user input or not? You don't really know this. So it's even more complicated, but having that mindset of not trusting user input and like instilling that very deeply, I think is a good, useful kind of like control to like have always be critical of like what you're doing and like what kind of things it can do. And to your other question, I think what I would say is when a lot of like static code analysis tools look at the code, they kind of try to deduce something that's called a taint analysis. So they look at input, right? Like what we call usually a source, and they look at where that source goes to. So a query parameter, where does it go to? It flies into the router, the controller, the service, whatever, the data layer, like whatever, however you build your apps. And then it flows into some SQL query, right? Like that's the sink. That's what we call the sink. So if you can try and have that mindset when you write code, when you review code, of like thinking of never trust user input and understand the code flow of like a source to sink, so you could have a more critical understanding of saying, hey, this is some query parameter. It goes fine through the layers, but it actually hits a file system operation, a child process execution, a SQL query, whatever. And you have to understand that when it flows there, then it can be very dangerous. So like if you haven't done what you should have done, like I don't know, like parameterized queries to an SQL or whatever that is, that the case that you're looking at, that is where you kind of like need to now understand those kind of things. So I think instilling different kind of mindsets that people with security background might ask themselves all the time when they look at code is kind of like a good journey towards having that security expertise. So I don't have like a whole checklist. You've done that this well, you're amazing. But it's a lot of things together. But those two, I think, are a good foundational concepts.
Yeah. So in other words, you say there is no checklist. There is a notion of understanding the platform. And another aspect that I'm here
There's
from
generally
you
a checklist, but the checklist is so different to so many different use cases that it's just like, yeah, it won't work. It's not like I want to require you to memorize a checklist for every different aspect.
Where do you recommend to find such a checklist for anyone that just want to? What is the best place? I think the first place is, of course, the nodesecurity.com website with Liran book. But yeah, I mean, is there anywhere that is a good source for learning stuff like that or reading about some checklists?
There are a lot of cases. I'll give my own. I think Matteo wants to add some. I think that so obviously like I write stuff about security, about Node, about those topics on the Sneak blog as well. There's obviously like the Sneak blog. There's Sneak Learn, which is like very short interactive informational courses for that. There's also I want to say OWASP, which is like it's generally like a really good resource. It's just like it's so massively big that it's really easy to get lost. So maybe if you're like looking for, if you're Googling something, add OWASP at the end and maybe you'll like land on the right aspects. My website, my Node.js website is more about secure coding concept. So it's not obviously I give a lot of, we learn about a vulnerability, we dissect a vulnerable code, and then we like understand the best practices around it. But it's more of like a books knowledge training kind of thing. It's not like an actual checklist. Matteo, what do you think? What do you want to say? Do you want to add any checklist for security from your experience?
So
don't write code.
No, turn off your computer. Turn off your computer and throw into the bin. That is a good solution for all security problems. Okay, go be a farmer. That's the way.
Yeah. Why not?
Yeah. So the solution. Okay, I don't see good practices around that. Okay. What I would say is try. First of all,
Yeah.
a good lot of people, okay, are promoting frameworks and technologies without any security mindset in place. And especially when they take a look at the tutorial, at a tutorial in general, okay, you will need to ask yourself, what do I need to do to make this secure? Okay, and be production ready. Okay, and for example, okay, part of the problem can be, you know, oh, my framework has an embedded validator for the routes, or my framework does not have an embedded validator for the routes. Okay. And now you have a question of how do I make things that things are validated correctly, and how things are, you know, protected against prototype poisoning, for example. Okay, and which it's a problem. Okay, so again, I'm not saying this is widespread, but the problem here is a huge amount of tutorials out there do not show you how to write secure code. Okay, and basically we are training up a generation of developers that have absolutely no clue about security. So this is a starting point, okay? Because if you start doing all the things that are needed for security, your fancy developer experience demo will not be as fancy, okay? Yeah. Because you need to start worrying a lot about course. Like, how many tutorials have you seen that does course and set course as a star?
Yeah.
How many production app have shipped that does course as a star?
All of them. I ship them.
Now you see the problem, right?
Tuesday, it's fast, Matteo.
It's okay. Just to explain this, and who understand? How many people do you think understand course? Okay. By the way, course is my number one question that I ask senior devs. If you don't know course, you're not a senior dev. I'm sorry. Okay, it's one of the.
I also like the way that you're both like distinct. You're saying like a senior developer is no one that knows to code fast or know to a language very well. It's about knowing the platform that you are developed for. If you call yourself a senior Node.js developer, you need to make sure that you know about security, you know about performance in the runtime.
To be honest, it's not about Node.
Yeah, exactly. It's about web, as you said, about cores. If you don't know well cores, then a lot of your Node.js experience will be redundant, right? I think that's a great insight for people who want or call themselves senior developers. Maybe I shouldn't stop calling myself senior, but I know what is core. So
yeah, no, you see the point, yeah.
And I use that in interview too. Yeah, that's
again,
a good
I literally question. I've seen in interviews people not knowing what the difference between asymmetric cryptography versus an asymmetric cryptography algorithm. And now, if you have no difference in those, if you have no clue about the difference between those two things, how the heck can you secure your app?
Yeah,
there's no way you can. How can I trust you to do your work?
That don't know. Yeah.
But how can you configure that library? Okay, if you don't know those basic fundamental topics, you will not be able to even use a library, because if you use a symmetric key for cookies or your tokens, then you need to know what to do to rotate them and so on and so forth. Okay, but nobody thinks about that. Okay, and so no, it's a very tough problem. So going back to the resources. The biggest one that somebody needs to look these days, anyway, always, it's OWASP. Okay, OWASP provides you the fundamental bits. Okay, and have long pages where you can learn all the things, and they're kept up to date. So, you know, you can see even the history when new attacks become available, they go and update and add more stuff. And if you go to look at the CRCF ones, they just like it's so freaking complex that it basically tells you one rule: never host more than one app on one top level domain. Sorry. Okay. This is more or less a generic rule of thumb. And everybody that I know even host the development. A lot of companies even lost the development apps on their main top level domains. And now I can hack your development app to gain access to the main app through CRCF attacks. And now you're pretty much screwed. Okay. And, it's just making that choice was a mistake. So going back to that, OWASP, absolutely. There are books like Liran's. You can go and read Liran's book that I have not read, by the way, but I read the previous one. I take a look at the previous one. So it's it's good. And then use libraries that are very much maintained. Okay. If you and supported, okay. Consider this: all top level libraries these days receive multiple vulnerabilities per month. If the tools that you're not using are very popular and have a very front-facing app like a web framework, and they have not issued a security release for some time, there is probably something fishy there. So
okay. So we have like a lot of questions from the audience, and we don't have that much time to answer. So let's try to take 1 minute to answer each. And if people want to keep in touch more, let's try. Let's discuss after on the LinkedIn thread or Twitter. But the first question, I'll start from the last because I think it's an easy one. Someone asked about your last explanation. If I understand correctly, we should not have myapp.io and dev.myapp.io.
As different apps,
Yeah, that's good. Correct. Great. So you understand correctly, Rajan.
Please. This is a good advice. Don't do it. Explaining why, it's a long discussion, okay? Requires a lot of background knowledge, but a generic rule of thumb, don't do it. It's great.
Yeah. Good. Another question is there any way we can evaluate security of a framework or library? Any common thing that we should look out for in a framework library? So I'll take it because you're both like answered a lot and think that looking that a package is maintained first. And if you have some experience with security, just run a quick fact check. If it's a server library, check that is it's avoiding poisoning, right? And make some basic user serialization. That will give you a good insight about is this library secure or not. Another question is, do security concerns change with different runtimes? For example, something that could be a vulnerability in Node may not vulnerability in BAN.
Yeah.
So definitely. The answer is yes, runtimes are different, and you definitely need to make sure that you understand the security concern of particular runtime. Also, one question that came in the beginning of the live stream: what is the difference between WebStream API and Node.js Stream? When to use what?
That's for you, Matteo. WebStream's API, WebStream's API versus Node streams.
WebStreams are slow.
No.
If you don't know, don't use them.
Yeah, that's a great answer.
There's no... And they are slower because they allocate a lot of promises. And a lot of promises cause a lot of work. So, and the one from Node could be optimized more. I'm pretty, I want to be very straightforward, could be better optimized, and there's a lot of work being done to optimize them. So very likely they will become better over time. But so far, they are significantly slower than the Node.js ones. And even the Node.js ones are not fast. So we are talking at various degrees of slowness. Okay, if you let me. But it's what Fuji streams. It's they're problematic. In other runtimes, they are problematic too, but they have they use an API that's actually pretty great called lock, and you could actually lock a pair. And then when you do this locking of a pair, they, for example, in Dino, they can move. They basically bypass all the logic at the top in JavaScript and run it all only in the native layer, and therefore making it super fast. So that's how you cheat and how you build fast systems with What2G streams, which is a great API, by the way. I love the idea. But yeah, I would personally not recommend anybody to use them, minus if you need them, because you want to write the isomorphic code or whatever, then makes absolute sense to use them. But otherwise, stick to the Node ones. They were great, being there forever.
Great.
We ironed out all the bugs.
Yeah. So we just ran out of time. We do have one question on our LinkedIn, and I'm pretty sure Liran and Matteo, you are on LinkedIn, and you can just answer it there. I really want to thank you both for joining us. That was a fascinating hour. I learned a lot, and it's always fun to be with people with so much experience and love to the ecosystem. Anything last words you want to not last words, that was sad, man, but anything you want to say to the audience before we just wrapping up?
I would say if you already joined this, still, like, it sounds like you care about security, so kudos to you. You're on a good path.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, just saying hello to two great engineers. I have amazing privilege to get to know. Read the second book, Matteo. We are wrapping up with this sentence. Read the second book, Matteo, and I hope we'll join again soon. See you soon, and thanks for joining again. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.